The HOA fined me for building a shed that didn't even exist on my property. When I got the letter taped to my front door, I actually laughed out loud, until I walked into my backyard and realized there really was a shed. Only, I didn't build it. It was sitting behind my fence, brand new, metal walls glinting in the sunlight. The weird part? It looked like it might have been built partly on my land. Before I tell you what I found next, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, if you enjoy real-life neighborhood stories like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me share more stories like this one. Alright, so back to the story. My name's Daniel Reeves, and I've lived on Maple Glen Court for almost 5 years. The kind of neighborhood where everything looks perfect on the outside, painted shutters, trimmed lawns, and people who wave but never actually talk. The HOA here is notoriously strict. They'll fine you for parking your car in the street overnight, for leaving your trash cans visible from the road, even for planting the wrong color flowers. But still, I'd managed to stay out of trouble all these years. Until now. The letter said, violation notice, unapproved structure in backyard. Please remove the metal shed immediately to avoid further fines. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the words like they were written in another language. A metal shed? I didn't have one. I thought it had to be some kind of mistake or a mix-up with another address. So I stepped into my backyard just to double-check, and that's when I froze. There it was. A full-size metal shed I'd never seen before, just on the other side of my fence, but close enough to look like it was mine. I walked to the corner where my property line met the neighbor's. The fence posts looked slightly off, like someone had adjusted them. That's when my stomach started to sink. The shed was built so close that the back panel might have actually crossed over into my yard by a few feet. My neighbor, Cameron, had mentioned something a while back about needing extra storage space for his landscaping tools, but he never said anything about construction. Still, I figured it had to be his. I went inside, grabbed the survey map from when I bought the house, and walked the line step by step. The measurements didn't lie. Whoever installed that shed had eaten into my property by at least 2 feet. As I was still processing that, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop. Neighborhood Watch Complaint, 1127 Maple Glen Court. I clicked it open. Dear Mr. Reeves, a report was filed regarding unauthorized construction on your property. Our Neighborhood Watch program has documented the structure and notified the HOA board. Please resolve this matter within 7 days to avoid enforcement action. I couldn't believe it. Someone from the Neighborhood Watch, probably one of those nosy types who drive around taking pictures of people's lawns, had filed a complaint against me. Over a shed that wasn't even mine. I decided to confront Cameron directly. He was outside washing his truck when I walked over, the HOA letter in my hand. Hey Cameron, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. Did you happen to put up that new shed behind our fence? He didn't even look up. Yeah, last weekend. Why? Well, I said, holding up the letter. Apparently the HOA thinks it's on my property. They're saying I need to take it down. That got his attention. He put down the hose, frowned, and followed me around the side of the house. We both stood there, looking at the shed. Up close, I could see the fresh dirt around the base where the ground had been dug out to level it. I had the contractor check the boundaries, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. He swore it was all on my land. I pointed toward one of the metal fence stakes sticking out near the back corner. Then how do you explain that being on your side of the shed? Cameron squinted, realizing what I meant. His confident tone started to fade. That's weird, he muttered. The guy must have messed up the layout. I'll call him. Please do, I said. Because the HOA already sent me a warning, and I don't plan to pay a fine for something that isn't mine. He nodded, promised to handle it, and I figured that would be the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. The next morning, another envelope showed up, this one red instead of yellow. It said, failure to comply with HOA request will result in a $200 daily fine until removal. I hadn't even had a full day to respond. It was like they were waiting for me to fail. I called the HOA office, got their automated system, and after 20 minutes on hold, a bored-sounding woman told me, "Sir, if the complaint came from Neighborhood Watch and was verified by our enforcement officer, there's nothing we can do until the issue is resolved." That was when I realized something strange. Whoever filed that complaint hadn't just sent it to the HOA. They'd also attached photos of the shed from multiple angles, taken at night. I hadn't seen them before, but now they were in the email thread. The timestamps were between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Why would someone from Neighborhood Watch be taking pictures of my backyard in the middle of the night? I decided to check my own security camera footage. I pulled up the recordings from that same night, and what I saw made my hands go cold. At 2:43 a.m., my side camera caught two men unloading metal panels from a flatbed truck parked on the street. They were wearing dark clothing, moving fast, setting up lights near the back fence. One of them kept looking around nervously, while the other started digging near the post line. Then, as the camera panned slightly, I caught a face in the light: Cameron. He was there, standing beside them, directing the whole thing. That's when everything clicked. The shed wasn't just on my land by accident, it had been placed there intentionally. But why would my neighbor do that, and why would the Neighborhood Watch get involved? Was he trying to push my property line back? Or hide something? The more I thought about it, the more the whole situation started to feel off. I decided I wasn't going to just sit back and wait for more fines. That night, I made up my mind to get to the bottom of it myself. But I had no idea that by the next morning, the situation would escalate way beyond a property dispute, and I'd find out exactly how connected the HOA, the Neighborhood Watch, and my neighbor really were. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the footage of Cameron standing in my backyard at 2:43 a.m., directing those two men like it was some secret project. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would he build a shed partly on my property in the middle of the night? Why not during the day, when it wouldn't look suspicious? The next morning, I made myself a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table staring out the window toward that ugly metal shed. From my angle, I could see half of its side and the faint reflection of sunlight bouncing off it. It looked ordinary. But knowing Cameron, nothing he did ever really was. I decided to walk over there when I saw him outside mowing his front lawn. He waved at me like nothing happened, his usual neighborly grin plastered on his face. That made my skin crawl even more. I waited until he turned off the mower, then said, "Hey, about that shed. Did your contractor ever call you back?" He nodded, wiping his forehead. He said, "It's definitely on my property. Must have been a measurement error on your end, man." I frowned. Funny, because my survey map says otherwise. And the HOA already hit me with another fine. You want to tell me why there are pictures of my backyard being taken at 2:30 in the morning? That got him. His eyes narrowed, just for a second, before he shrugged and forced a laugh. "Dude, I don't know what you're talking about." I was asleep. I studied him for a moment. He was lying, I could see it in his eyes. I wanted to confront him with the footage right there, but I decided to hold off. Something told me I'd need to be careful about how I played this. After he went back inside, I walked to the side of my house, where the fence ran along the property line. I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small gap behind the shed, just wide enough to squeeze through. My curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from the garage and waited until dusk when most people were inside. I climbed over the fence quietly and landed on the narrow strip of dirt between the shed and the back fence. From this angle, I could see that the shed wasn't actually anchored to the ground properly. The back panel wasn't even bolted in. When I knelt down, I spotted what looked like freshly disturbed soil. Someone had been digging recently. I pressed my ear against the shed's metal wall, half expecting to hear something, but it was dead silent. I tried to peek through a small gap where the side panels met, but it was too dark inside. That's when I heard a faint sound, like a door closing softly from Cameron's side of the yard. I froze. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Then I slowly backed away, climbed back over the fence, and walked straight inside. My heart was pounding. That night, I reviewed my camera footage again, this time from the past few days. Sure enough, there was more activity than I realized. The same two men had returned the night after they built the shed. One of them was carrying what looked like a heavy plastic bin. They rolled it into the shed and stayed inside for nearly an hour before leaving. I didn't know what was in that bin, but I knew one thing: whatever Cameron was doing, it wasn't about storage. The next morning, I decided to reach out to someone else in the neighborhood. There's this guy named Brian, who lives 2 houses down. He's part of the Neighborhood Watch, but unlike most of them, he's actually reasonable. I showed him the photos, the violation notice, and a clip from my camera. He watched silently, arms crossed. When the footage ended, he looked uneasy. "I shouldn't even be saying this," he said, "but that complaint that got sent to the HOA, it didn't come from me or anyone I know on the team." I frowned. "Then who sent it?" He hesitated. "The report was filed from an unlisted neighborhood watch account." "That's not supposed to be possible. We all use verified emails." "Someone either spoofed the account or had inside access." That hit me hard. So someone from inside the HOA or the watch was involved. This wasn't just Cameron acting alone. I thanked Brian for his help and promised to keep him updated. That night, my paranoia was at an all-time high. I kept thinking about the shed, the fake complaint, and Cameron's calm attitude. What was he hiding that was worth getting the HOA involved? The next evening, while walking my dog, I passed by Cameron's driveway and noticed his garage door slightly open. Through the crack, I caught a glimpse of something metallic. Not a car, but equipment. It looked like surveillance hardware, the kind you'd see in security trucks, monitors, a laptop with cables running to a power source. I walked faster, pretending not to notice. But inside, my mind was spinning. Later that night, I decided to act. I set up one of my old motion cameras, aimed directly at the back fence near the shed. I wanted proof, not just speculation. Around midnight, the alert pinged my phone. Someone was out there again. I opened the live feed, and there he was, Cameron, holding a flashlight and speaking quietly into a phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he kept pointing at the shed and nodding like he was getting instructions. He stepped aside, and another person appeared, someone in a dark hoodie, carrying a small metal case. They both went inside the shed. I watched for almost 10 minutes before the feed went dark. My heart was racing. What were they doing? Why at this hour again? The next morning, I walked outside pretending to water my plants, just to see if they were still around. Cameron's truck was gone. The shed was still there, locked up tight with a heavy-duty padlock that hadn't been there before. That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront him this time. I was going to gather every bit of evidence I could and take it straight to the HOA and the police. But before I could do that, I needed proof of what was actually inside. That afternoon, I met with Brian again, and I told him everything. When I mentioned the unlisted watch account, he looked even more uneasy. "Daniel," he said quietly, "you might want to be careful. If someone inside the HOA or the watch is helping your neighbor, that means this isn't about property lines. It's about access." "Access to what?" I asked. "To information," he replied. "Or surveillance. We've had a few complaints about someone tapping into other people's Wi-Fi or using camera feeds without permission. I thought it was kids messing around, but now I'm not so sure." I stared at him, stunned. Everything suddenly made sense. The shed, the late-night building, the security footage. It wasn't just about land. It was about data. That night, I made a plan. I was going to find out what was inside that shed, no matter what it took. I woke up before sunrise, unable to shake the thought of that locked shed. It was like it was staring back at me from my kitchen window, mocking me every time I looked up for my coffee. I'd already replayed the footage at least 20 times, memorizing every movement Cameron and that hooded figure made. I didn't have a concrete plan yet, but one thing was certain: I couldn't keep pretending this was just a neighbor's weird hobby. Something bigger was going on. I started my morning by checking the HOA app on my phone. They'd added another notice, this time about unauthorized surveillance devices on private property. It wasn't directed at anyone by name, but the timing couldn't have been worse. They were clearly referring to the camera I'd placed near the fence. Either Cameron had reported it, or someone else had seen it. That made me realize how deep this could go. The HOA wasn't just protecting him, they were actively trying to silence anyone who might expose what was happening. By mid-morning, I decided I needed someone else on my side. I texted Brian again and asked if we could meet in person, somewhere away from the neighborhood. We met at a small cafe near the highway, one of those places where nobody pays attention to who walks in or out. He showed up 10 minutes late, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and looking more cautious than I'd ever seen him. "You sure this is about the shed?" he asked as he sat down. I nodded. "Yeah. I think whatever's in there connects to that fake neighborhood watch complaint. You said something about Wi-Fi access before. What did you mean by that?" He hesitated, then leaned in. "Okay, off the record. About 2 months ago, a few people around here started complaining about weird activity on their networks. Cameras flickering, smart devices turning on randomly, things like that. When I checked with the watch system logs, I noticed several of those reports had come from around your street. My street. I repeated. Yeah. And what's strange is, the device IDs were showing as registered inside the neighborhood watch database, but they weren't ours. Someone cloned our access system. That hit me hard. So you're saying someone hacked into the watch network and used it to spy on people? He nodded. That's my guess. But what's worse is that they're routing it through private Wi-Fi networks. That means if you're connected to the same internet provider, they can piggyback through your system. It's technically illegal as hell, but if someone's smart enough to disguise the signal, it looks like normal data. I sat back, processing everything. It lined up perfectly: the fake violation, the shed, the late-night digging, the cameras. Cameron wasn't building a storage unit. He was building a hub. I need to see what's inside that shed, I said finally. Brian sighed. If you do that without a warrant, and he catches you, you could be the one in trouble. But he paused, pulling something from his jacket, a small USB stick. If you can get within a few feet of that shed, this can scan for Wi-Fi signals and MAC addresses. It'll tell us if any devices are broadcasting from there. I stared at the drive in his hand. You had this ready? He smirked faintly. Let's just say this isn't the first time I've dealt with something shady in this neighborhood. That night, I waited until Cameron's lights went out around 11:30 p.m. I grabbed a hoodie, gloves, and Brian's USB scanner, which connected to my phone through an app he'd installed for me. I crept through the backyard and climbed the fence again, landing softly near the shed. The air was still, the kind of heavy silence that makes every tiny sound feel like an explosion. I crouched beside the shed and held up my phone. The app took a few seconds to load, and then it lit up. 5 active networks were broadcasting from the shed. One of them was labeled NW_camera grid. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a coincidence. That was the same internal network name used by the neighborhood watch camera system. I recorded everything, taking screenshots and timestamps. Then I crouched lower, scanning for any sign of movement from the house. The padlock on the shed looked solid, but the side panel still had that gap where the bolts were missing. I pressed against it gently, and to my surprise, it shifted slightly. I hesitated for a moment. This was probably the point where a reasonable person would stop. But reason had checked out days ago. I pushed the panel until it popped open just enough for me to peek inside. It took a second for my eyes to adjust to the dark, but when they did, I froze. Inside, I could make out at least 3 computer towers, a tangle of cables, and several monitors mounted against the wall. The screens were off, but there were faint LED indicators blinking, meaning they were in standby mode. There were also several routers stacked on a shelf, each one labeled with a street name. I leaned closer, squinting: Maple Drive, Oak Ridge, Brookside Lane. They weren't random. Those were our neighborhood streets. I took out my phone and snapped a quick photo through the gap. That's when I heard a soft click from behind me. Daniel. I turned slowly. Cameron was standing there, holding a flashlight. His voice was calm. What are you doing on my property? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I could ask you the same thing, considering half of this shed is on my land. He smirked, lowering the flashlight just enough to make his face look shadowed. You really should mind your own business, neighbor. Some things are better left unseen. I know what's inside, I said. You're running a surveillance network. You've been using our Wi-Fi and the neighborhood watch cameras to spy on everyone. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then he gave a small, almost pitying laugh. You think too small, Daniel. It's not spying, it's monitoring. People want to feel safe, and safety comes at a cost. Someone has to keep an eye on things. You're selling access, aren't you? I realized. That's what this is about. You're collecting data from everyone's homes. He didn't deny it. He just took a step closer and said quietly, walk away from this. Delete whatever you have. I'll make sure the HOA clears your violations and even refunds your fines. But if you push this, if you go to the authorities, it won't end well for you. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. He wasn't threatening me directly, but the message was clear. I'm not walking away, I said, backing up toward the fence. Not this time. Cameron watched me leave, saying nothing. His calmness was worse than anger. It meant he was confident I couldn't touch him. When I got back inside my house, I locked every door and sent the photos and network logs to Brian. Within minutes, he called me back. Daniel, you're not going to believe this, he said. That network signature, it's connected to the HOA's security portal. They're running everything through it. Cameron's just managing the data collection. I sank into my chair, speechless. So the HOA wasn't being fooled. They were in on it. Brian, I said finally, we need to go public with this. There was silence on the line. Then he said, let's be smart. Give me 24 hours to trace the IPs. If I find what I think I will, we'll have proof that the HOA's been spying on the entire neighborhood. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Fine. But if something happens to me before then, you make sure everyone knows the truth. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me think Cameron was outside again, watching me. By the time the sun came up, I checked the locks 3 times and left the blinds half open, just in case. My phone buzzed around 8 a.m. It was Brian. I've been digging all night, he said without preamble. And you were right. The HOA portal isn't just for security reports. It's connected to a remote server, one that shouldn't exist. What do you mean? I asked, pacing the kitchen. I mean the neighborhood watch system, the HOA complaint database, and even the property violation forms. They're all connected through a single encrypted gateway. The data's being mirrored somewhere else. Every security camera, motion sensor, Wi-Fi connected doorbell in your area, it's all being funneled into that portal. I stopped mid-step. Where's it going? That's the weird part, Brian said. The IP address traces back to a private server registered under a shell company, Safe Site Residential Systems. And guess who signed the registration papers? I didn't answer. I already knew the name he was about to say. Cameron Hayes, Brian confirmed. Your neighbor. I rubbed my forehead. So the HOA knows he's doing this. Oh, they know. In fact, based on the timestamps, they've been approving every single neighborhood watch infrastructure upgrade he submitted for over a year. They're not being fooled, Daniel, they're collaborating. That hit me harder than I expected. I thought maybe the HOA was being manipulated, or maybe they were just lazy and didn't realize what was happening. But this was intentional. What do they get out of it? I asked quietly. Money, Brian said flatly. The shell company's routing payments to a consulting firm that's listed under the HOA's operating expenses. It's being masked as data maintenance fees. So they're selling our surveillance data, I said, my voice low. All the camera feeds, the activity logs, everything. Exactly. And not just to one buyer. I think they're selling access to multiple clients, probably private security firms, insurance companies, maybe even real estate developers who want behavioral data. It's smart, but it's illegal as hell. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I just stared at my coffee going cold, realizing how deep this went. Finally, Brian spoke again. Daniel, we need to be careful. If they know we're onto them, they'll come after you first. You're the one who's been poking around. He wasn't wrong. And it didn't take long for that prediction to start coming true. By noon, I received a letter taped to my door, another HOA notice. This time, it said I was being fined for unauthorized property modifications due to electronic interference devices. They'd found my hidden camera near the fence. And this time, the fine wasn't small. $2,500. I called the HOA office immediately. The receptionist, a woman named Cheryl who usually sounded half asleep, suddenly had a sharp, rehearsed tone. Sir, you've been repeatedly warned about non-compliance. The fine is valid and due within 7 business days. I want to appeal it, I said. She sighed, like she'd been expecting that. You're welcome to file a dispute, but given your recent behavior, I wouldn't recommend escalating things. The board has already expressed concerns about your conduct. Concerns? I repeated. For what? Asking questions. There was a pause, then she said quietly, Daniel, just let it go. Please. And then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, realizing that even the receptionist knew something. Maybe she wasn't involved, but she knew enough to be afraid. I texted Brian everything. He replied immediately, "They're closing in. Stay quiet for now. I'll handle the tracing." I tried to follow his advice, but the moment I stepped outside to grab my mail, I noticed something new: a white SUV parked 2 houses down. I'd never seen it before, and the driver didn't move or look up when I passed. The windows were tinted, and the engine was still running. That night, the same SUV drove by twice, slow enough that I could see the reflection of my porch light on its side panel. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "You see this?" I whispered, narrating into the camera. "This is the second time today that cars come by. Same model, same plate number. HOA security vehicle, my ass." I sent the clip to Brian. He didn't respond right away. But a few minutes later, he called. "Daniel, I just got access to the HOA's patrol logs. That SUV isn't registered to them. It's not even a local security contractor. It's owned by SafeSite. So they're following me now?" He hesitated. "Looks like it." For a moment, I felt a strange mix of fear and anger. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They wanted me to know I was being watched. "Brian, how much proof do you have right now?" I asked. "I've got enough to make them panic," he said. "But not enough to win. I still need one solid link, something that directly shows HOA members communicating about the data sales. Once I have that, I can take it to the state's privacy commission." "Then we need that link," I said. "And I think I know where to find it." He was silent for a second. "You're thinking about the shed again, aren't you?" "Not just the shed. Cameron's office. He's got to have access credentials, invoices, emails, something." "Daniel, you can't just break into his house," Brian said firmly. "I don't plan to," I said. "But there's an HOA board meeting this Friday. He'll be there. And if he brings his laptop." Brian groaned. "You're insane." "Maybe," I said. "But if this data trail proves what you think it does, then this isn't just about me anymore. They've been spying on everyone in this neighborhood for profit." He didn't argue after that. He just said quietly, "Be careful. These people don't play fair." By the end of the day, I'd already received 2 more random neighborhood watch alerts, both mentioning my property as a point of interest. My phone lit up with comments from other residents asking if I was okay, if I'd been causing trouble. That's when I realized they were turning the entire neighborhood against me, slowly, methodically. Make me look paranoid, discredit me, then bury the truth. But I wasn't going to let that happen. When Friday came, I'd already planned every detail of how I'd get inside Cameron's laptop without him noticing. And by the end of that meeting, I swore I'd have the proof I needed to bring them all down. The night of the HOA board meeting, I must have changed shirts 3 times. It wasn't vanity, it was nerves. My palms were sweating so much that even holding my phone felt slippery. The meeting was being held at the local community hall, the same beige room where they host potlucks and neighborhood barbecues. But tonight, it felt like a courtroom. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was Cameron's black laptop sitting neatly on the table at the front, the silver HOA logo sticker shining under the fluorescent lights. He was there too, talking to the chairwoman, Mrs. Langford, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. "Daniel," she greeted me, her tone politely distant. "Glad you could make it. I see you've received our recent notices." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Wouldn't miss the chance to clear things up." Cameron glanced at me, the corners of his mouth twitching just enough to let me know he wasn't here to play nice. I sat toward the back, where I could see everything: Cameron's laptop, the projector, even the power outlet his charger was plugged into. I'd spent the past 2 nights planning exactly what I'd do. Brian had given me a small USB drive, one that could silently copy the system logs once inserted. All I needed was a few minutes near Cameron's laptop. The meeting started as usual, with mundane talk about landscaping funds, new streetlights, and upcoming community events. But I barely heard a word. My focus was locked on that laptop. Every time Cameron leaned back or looked away, I memorized the angle, the distance, the time I'd have. Halfway through the agenda, Mrs. Langford brought up neighborhood security improvements, and Cameron stood to speak. "As you all know, The Neighborhood Watch initiative has reduced incidents by over 60% this quarter. Thanks to our real-time reporting and integrated systems, our community is now one of the safest in the county. I almost laughed. Safest? Sure, if you didn't count the fact that your private life was being streamed to strangers. A few people clapped politely. I took the opportunity to quietly rise from my seat, pretending to refill my coffee at the side table near the front. Cameron's laptop sat open, the screen still glowing faintly with a list of log entries. I casually set my cup down on the same table, my hand trembling slightly as I slid the USB drive from my pocket. One quick move, in and out. No one would notice. I waited for Cameron to step closer to the projector, then leaned forward and whispered to myself, now. I reached toward the laptop, but before I could plug it in, a voice spoke behind me. Need something, Daniel? It was Cameron. I froze, forcing a smile as I turned. Oh, just refilling my cup. The coffee's a little strong tonight, huh? He didn't smile back. His eyes dropped to my hand, the one still half raised near his laptop. For a moment, the entire room seemed to quiet down. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt louder. He looked at the USB, then at me, then back at the crowd, his expression suddenly switching from suspicion to fake friendliness. You know what, Daniel? Why don't you come up here for a moment? Since you're so interested in neighborhood safety, maybe you'd like to explain what's been concerning you lately. I could feel dozens of eyes turn toward me. My throat went dry. Mrs. Langford smiled tightly. That's a good idea. We've all heard about some misunderstandings regarding your property. Let's clear the air. I swallowed hard. Sure, I said, stepping forward. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely think. When I reached the front, Cameron stepped aside slightly, giving me room, but not before quietly murmuring, "Go ahead, Daniel. Tell everyone your conspiracy theory." I faced the group. Look, I know what's been said about me, that I'm paranoid, that I've been tampering with equipment. But I'm not crazy. Something's going on with the HOA's data systems. I've seen the connections. The same people managing the Neighborhood Watch are also collecting data from private security cameras. Not just mine, everyone's. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That can't be true." I continued, "You've all signed up for what you thought was a safety program. But what if I told you your home feeds, your front doors, your driveways, your kids playing in the yard, might be accessible to people outside this neighborhood?" Cameron laughed, a loud mocking laugh that cut through the tension. "That's ridiculous. Daniel, you've been warned about making false accusations before. We even issued you a formal violation notice." "It's not false," I snapped. "I have evidence." He crossed his arms. "Then show it." My plan had fallen apart. I never got the USB in. I had nothing to show, not yet. But before I could speak again, a voice came from the back. "Actually," Brian said, stepping into the room. The entire board turned. Cameron's confident smirk vanished. Brian wasn't supposed to be here. I'd told him to stay out of it. But there he was, holding up his phone. "You want evidence? Here." He tapped the screen, and the projector behind Cameron flickered. Suddenly, the display changed from the HOA's budget spreadsheet to a list of video files, dozens of them, all labeled with addresses from the neighborhood. One by one, short clips began playing: front doors, backyards, garages, each feed timestamped and tagged. The room erupted. People gasped, shouted, demanded answers. Mrs. Langford turned pale. Cameron lunged toward his laptop, yanking the HDMI cable out. "This is an invasion of privacy," someone yelled. "No," Brian said firmly, stepping forward. "This is what you've been doing to them." And I traced every data transfer. All of it leads to Safe Site Residential Systems, owned by Cameron Hayes. Cameron's voice trembled with forced authority. "This is a misunderstanding. Those feeds were test data, for internal training." "Cut the crap," I said. "You've been spying on us. Selling the data." The shouting grew louder. Mrs. Langford tried to call for order, but no one was listening anymore. Finally, Cameron slammed his laptop shut, grabbed it, and stormed out, but not before giving me one last look. A cold, silent warning. I turned to Brian, who exhaled shakily. "Guess the quiet approach is over," he said. Yeah, I muttered. Now it's out in the open. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The meeting might have blown things wide open, but Cameron wasn't the type to back off quietly. And if he'd been confident enough to run an operation like this for over a year, he probably had contingency plans, ones I hadn't even seen yet. As the room buzzed with angry homeowners and HOA members trying to do damage control, Brian leaned closer and said, "We've got enough to go public. But before we do, we need to make sure they can't erase the data. If they start deleting files tonight, all of this will vanish." I nodded slowly, watching as Cameron's car peeled out of the parking lot. Then we'd better move fast. The parking lot outside the community hall was almost empty now, except for a few cars and the harsh yellow glow from the streetlights. Cameron's taillights had disappeared minutes ago, leaving behind a tense silence. The meeting had ended in chaos, people shouting, arguing, and demanding answers from the board. But the only thing on my mind was what Brian said: we need to make sure they can't erase the data. He was right. His laptop's the key, I said quietly, walking toward my truck. If he's got remote access to the servers, he could wipe everything in seconds. Brian followed, his phone already in his hand, thumbs flying across the screen. "I'm checking the network traffic from earlier. I might be able to see where he was connecting to during the meeting." We climbed into the truck, shutting the doors against the cold. My pulse still hadn't slowed since the confrontation. "You think he'll try to destroy the evidence tonight?" "He'd be stupid not to," Brian said. "Once that footage went public in the meeting, he knew the walls were closing in. My guess? He'll lock down or delete every trace that links him to SafeSite servers." I started the engine. "Then we go there." Brian looked up. "Where?" "The shed," I said. "If the data runs through that system, then that's where he'll start cleaning house. He won't wait until morning." For a second, Brian hesitated. Then he nodded. "All right. Let's go." We drove in silence through the dimly lit neighborhood. The same quiet streets that had always felt safe now looked different, like every porch light and every camera might be watching. I realized how ironic it was. The same system that was supposed to keep everyone safe had turned into something no one could trust. When we reached the back of the development, the familiar shape of the maintenance shed came into view. Its lights were off, but a faint hum came from inside, a low rhythmic vibration that hadn't been there before. "Someone's in there," Brian whispered. I parked a few houses down, and we approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. The closer we got, the louder the hum became, the sound of hard drives spinning, fans running at full tilt. Through a crack in the metal door, I saw the faint glow of monitors. Brian crouched beside the lock, inspecting it. "He's upgraded it. New digital keypad. Can you get past it?" He smirked. "Give me a minute." While he worked, I scanned the area. The street was quiet, too quiet. No passing cars, no dog walkers, nothing. It was nearly 1 a.m., and every house was dark. The only sound was the soft beep of Brian's tools and the faint whirring from inside. Then, click. The keypad flashed green. We slipped inside. The shed was smaller than I remembered, but every inch of wall space was filled with equipment: routers, monitors, stacks of drives, and what looked like a live feed system for multiple camera networks. Brian moved to the central computer and began typing rapidly. "Good news," he muttered. "The system's still online. Bad news, someone's remotely accessing it right now. Cameron. Has to be. He's trying to reroute the backups. If he finishes, everything will vanish from local storage. What can we do?" "I can interrupt the transfer, but we'll have to copy the files manually. If I cut the connection, he'll know we're in the system." "Then do it," I said. "We'll deal with him knowing later." Brian nodded, pressed a key, and the screens flickered. The hum of the drives intensified, then slowed. He connected his own external drive, the same one he used to collect the first batch of data. Lines of code began racing across the screen. "Copying everything," he said. "Video archives, logs, access records. Everything we can grab before he locks us out." A loud chime rang from one of the monitors. "Unauthorized login detected," a robotic voice announced. We froze. Then another message flashed: "Remote access terminated." Brian exhaled. "He knows." Seconds later, the shed's exterior light flicked on. My stomach dropped. "Get the drive," I hissed. Brian yanked the cable out and pocketed the drive just as headlights swept across the dirt lot outside. Cameron's black SUV skidded to a stop near the shed, engine still running. "Out the back," I whispered. We slipped through the side exit and crouched behind the fence. Cameron stormed inside, shouting into his phone. "No, I don't care what it takes. Shut down every node, now." I said now. We stayed completely still, hearts hammering. Through a gap in the fence, I saw him pacing, looking around. His face was red, his movements frantic. "They were here," he growled into the phone. "Check the logs, someone accessed the main feed." Then, as if realizing he was wasting time, he moved to the main console and began ripping cables out of the servers. Sparks flew as one of the cords snapped. Brian tugged my sleeve. "He's killing the system physically. We need to go now." We slipped along the fence line, staying low until we reached the end of the block. I could still hear Cameron's muffled shouting in the distance. When we finally reached my truck, Brian slammed the door shut and held up the drive. "Got it all." I started the engine and pulled away, not daring to look back. "Think he saw us?" "He'll figure it out," Brian said. "But at least now he can't erase the proof." We drove straight to Brian's apartment on the edge of town, a cramped but cluttered space filled with old monitors and soldering tools. He plugged the drive into his desktop, and the data transfer began. The screen filled with folders, timestamps, and footage, hundreds of hours of video. As the files loaded, one folder caught my eye. It wasn't labeled with an address like the others, it just said HOA_internal. "Open it," I said. Inside were dozens of email threads, invoices, and legal memos. The more we scrolled, the worse it got. Payments from SafeSite to HOA board members, lists of property owners flagged for monitoring, and references to enhanced surveillance partnerships. It wasn't just our neighborhood. There were references to other communities. Dozens of them. Brian leaned back, eyes wide. "This isn't just Cameron's side hustle. This is a whole network. They're running private surveillance for multiple HOAs, all linked through the same system." My stomach turned. "So every neighborhood under that network is being watched," he finished quietly. We sat there in silence, the gravity of what we'd uncovered sinking in. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came through seconds later. When I played it, Cameron's voice was calm, eerily calm. "Daniel, I hope you know what you've done. That data wasn't yours to touch. You've made a mistake you can't undo." The line clicked off. Brian met my eyes. "He's not bluffing." "No," I said, staring at the glowing screen. "He's not." Outside, the street was quiet. But for the first time, I didn't feel safe. Not in my house, not in this neighborhood, not anywhere this system existed. And as the files kept copying, I realized something. We hadn't just exposed a local HOA scandal. We'd just tripped over something much bigger, something that was never supposed to be found. By morning, my phone was filled with notifications, missed calls, unread messages, and one email that made my stomach drop. Subject: Cease and desist notice, unauthorized access and theft of private data. The sender? Cameron Hayes, HOA president. I opened it, my hands tightening around my coffee mug. The email was filled with legal jargon, accusations that I'd illegally accessed, downloaded, and distributed confidential material from the HOA systems. It demanded that I return all proprietary information, and warned of immediate legal action if I didn't comply. At the bottom, his signature gleamed in blue font, with a smug little note attached. "We'll let the authorities determine who the real criminal is here." I read it twice, then 3 times, until the words started to blur. "He's actually doing it," I muttered. Brian looked up from his computer, eyes bloodshot. He hadn't slept either. "He's bluffing. He doesn't want this going public." I shook my head. "No, he's trying to flip the script. Make it look like we're the ones who broke the law." Brian pushed his chair back and rubbed his temples. "Then we need to get ahead of him. If he reports you first, he controls the narrative." The screen beside him was still filled with the files we'd copied from the HOA servers, emails, documents, logs. proof of everything they'd done. But now, that proof had become a double-edged sword. I stared at the folder labeled HOA_internal and exhaled slowly. "We go public," I said finally. "Before he buries us." Brian hesitated. "You sure? Once it's out there, there's no going back. You'll be on every HOA blacklist in the state. They'll spin it, make you the bad guy." "They're already trying," I said. "If I stay quiet, I lose everything anyway." He nodded reluctantly. "Then we do it right. We'll organize the files, redact personal info, make it clean and undeniable." We spent the next few hours cross-checking timestamps and compiling documents. The deeper we went, the more disturbing it became. Patterns of unauthorized surveillance requests, financial kickbacks from SafeSite, and even lists of priority properties marked for monitoring. At one point, Brian leaned back, frowning. "This file, it's labeled Pilot Program. It has HOA board signatures from other communities too. They've been doing this for years." "How many?" I asked. He scrolled, scanning the list. "Over 30 neighborhoods. Maybe more." That's when my phone buzzed again, this time, a local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Daniels," a woman's voice said, clipped and professional. "This is Officer Karen Holmes with the county police. We've received a report from your homeowners association regarding potential cyber intrusion and data theft. Are you available to come down to the station for questioning?" I froze. "Wait, you're investigating me?" "That's correct," she said evenly. "Mr. Hayes has provided documentation suggesting you gained unauthorized access to restricted HOA systems." "I can explain," I said quickly. "I have proof of what he's been doing." "Sir," she interrupted, "I'm not the one you need to convince. We just need to ask a few questions. You can bring any evidence you wish to provide." The call ended before I could respond. Brian looked at me. "They're moving fast." "He's got connections," I said bitterly. "Probably called them the second we left the shed." Brian tapped the side of his laptop, thinking. "We can still win this. We upload everything anonymously, to the press, to watchdog sites. Once it's public, they can't bury it." I nodded, adrenaline pushing through my exhaustion. "Do it." While he worked, I started sorting through my personal files, notes, screenshots, the original footage I downloaded from the HOA server. Every piece of proof mattered now. Then, through the blinds, I saw a white SUV pull up across the street. "Brian," I said quietly. "You expecting anyone?" He looked up. "No. Why?" Two men in plain clothes stepped out of the SUV, both with earpieces. They weren't in uniform, but their posture gave it away. Cops, or something close to it. My phone buzzed again, this time, a text from an unknown number. "Stop what you're doing. You're making a mistake you can't fix." I showed it to Brian. "He's not done." "Then neither are we," he said. He hit enter, and the upload began. A progress bar appeared on the screen. 2%. 5%. 8%. Outside, one of the men approached the door. A firm knock echoed through the apartment. "Mr. Daniels," a voice called. "County Police. We need to ask you a few questions." Brian's eyes darted to the upload bar. 23%. "Keep them busy," he whispered. "We just need 5 more minutes." I took a breath and opened the door slightly, keeping the chain locked. "Can I help you?" The lead officer flashed a badge. "Daniel Daniels? We have a few questions about unauthorized access to the HOA's internal systems." I nodded slowly. "You mean the system that's illegally recording residents without consent?" His expression didn't change. "Sir, we just need you to come with us. You're not under arrest, but it'll be easier to clear this up in person." Behind me, I could hear Brian's keyboard tapping furiously. "I'm happy to cooperate," I said, stalling. "But my attorney—" The man cut me off. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mr. Daniels." Then Brian shouted from the back room. "Uploads complete." The officer's eyes flicked past me, just as Brian appeared with his laptop half closed. "What's going on here?" the officer asked sharply. "Nothing," Brian said, trying to sound casual. Just backing up some files. The other man stepped forward, but I moved to block him. You have a warrant for this? They hesitated, and that split second was all Brian needed. He yanked the power cord out, grabbed the external drive, and slipped it into his pocket. Then, to my shock, he walked straight toward the officers. You want answers, he said. Fine. But you're going to want to see what's really on this. They exchanged a look. I'm giving this to the press, he added. And you can decide whether you want your names attached to the people who tried to bury it. The lead officer frowned. That's not how this works. Yeah, Brian said, stepping out onto the porch. Then you better make sure your boss knows what Cameron's been paying you for. They didn't reply. The tension thickened for a moment, and then slowly, the men turned and walked back to their SUV. When they drove off, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Brian turned to me. It's out there. I sent the files to 3 different outlets before you opened the door. Even if they try to delete them, it's too late now. I nodded, still catching my breath. Then it's over. He shook his head. No. It's just starting. Cameron's going to hit back harder. Lawsuits, media spin, maybe worse. I looked down the quiet street, where the SUV had disappeared. Let him. The truth's finally out. The next morning, I woke up to chaos, not from my phone buzzing, but from the sound of voices outside my window. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw a crowd gathered near the community bulletin board. Neighbors holding their phones, whispering to each other, staring at something on their screens. I opened my laptop and checked the news. There it was. Front page of 3 local outlets. Local HOA accused of illegal surveillance and data misuse. Neighborhood watch tied to private security contract scandal. Residents recorded without consent, HOA president under investigation. Every headline hit like a wave. My name wasn't mentioned, not yet at least, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The story was out. The documents Brian and I had leaked were already circulating online. Someone on Reddit had even started a thread called HOA Spying on Residents. This is why I moved out. It was blowing up fast. When I stepped outside, people actually turned to look at me. Some nodded in quiet acknowledgement, others avoided eye contact. A few came up to me, neighbors I'd only exchanged small talk with before. Hey Daniel, one of them said, an older man from 2 houses down. That stuff in the news, is it true? Yeah, I said simply. Every word of it. He sighed, shaking his head. Unbelievable. I knew something was off with those cameras. My wife said she felt like we were being watched. Another woman, holding her phone, frowned. I trusted them to keep us safe, not spy on us. As the day went on, the story snowballed. HOA officials started issuing statements, trying to downplay it, saying it was all a technical misconfiguration or miscommunication between the neighborhood watch and their security vendor. But screenshots of Cameron's emails told a different story. The screenshots I had leaked. By noon, a news van pulled up at the community gate. Then another. And another. Cameras. Reporters. The whole street turned into a media circus. I watched from my porch as Cameron walked out of his house, flanked by 2 people in suits. He didn't look as confident as usual. His crisp white shirt was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. One of the reporters called out, "Mr. Hayes, did you knowingly authorize illegal surveillance on residents?" Cameron didn't answer. He just kept walking toward his car, head down. The moment he got in, I noticed something new. The HOA president badge on his car window was gone. A few hours later, an email from the interim HOA board arrived in my inbox. Short, formal, and carefully worded. Effective immediately, Cameron Hayes has resigned from his position as president of the Pine Grove Estates Homeowners Association, pending an ongoing legal review. We appreciate your patience and understanding during this transition. That was it. No apology. No admission. Just an empty statement trying to bury the damage. But it didn't matter. The residents had already turned on them. Group chats were filled with angry messages, people threatening to sue, demanding refunds, organizing emergency meetings. Someone even posted a photo of the neighborhood security cameras being taken down by maintenance workers. By evening, I finally sat down with Brian again. His apartment looked like a war room that had finally seen peace, half-empty coffee cups, cables, and laptops scattered everywhere. "You did it," he said quietly. "You actually took them down." I shook my head. "We did it. And honestly, it still doesn't feel real." Brian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You think they'll come after you legally?" "Maybe," I admitted. "But I've got everything documented. If they try anything, the public will know it's retaliation. And they're already hanging by a thread." He smiled faintly. "You know, when you first told me about your neighbor's shed, I thought you were being paranoid." "Yeah," I said with a tired laugh. "Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough." We sat there in silence for a while, just letting the weight of it all settle. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The next few days blurred together. The HOA held a community-wide meeting where residents demanded transparency. Most of the board resigned. New elections were announced. And the Neighborhood Watch program? Suspended indefinitely, pending a security review. As for me, I wasn't exactly a hero. Some people thanked me for speaking up, others blamed me for making the neighborhood look bad. I didn't care either way. I hadn't done it for recognition. I'd done it because no one deserves to be watched in their own home. A week later, a manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short handwritten note. "They're not done. Be careful who you trust." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. Cameron's. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the note. Then I tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. Whatever power he thought he had left, it was gone. That night, as I sat on my porch with a cold drink, the neighborhood felt quieter than it had in months. No camera lights blinking in the distance. No suspicious SUVs idling on the curb. Just the faint hum of crickets and the soft rustle of trees in the dark. I scrolled through my phone one last time, checking the final article that summarized everything. The arrests, the resignations, the legal investigations that were still unfolding. At the end of the piece, a quote from one resident stood out. "We thought the Neighborhood Watch was keeping us safe. Turns out, we needed someone to watch them." I smiled faintly, locked my phone, and leaned back in my chair. It was over. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I could finally breathe again. If you stayed till the end, you're the kind of person who actually listens, and that means a lot. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story that hits just as close to home. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach.